they've informed me this morning and all the other sources that report in, and then all of us would be happy to take your questions. First of all, I should tell you that I am proudly here wearing the Toronto Maple Leafs jacket, and we've got them exactly where we want them. And you have to stay loyal here, and they're coming home to play on Monday night, and I'm an optimist, and we've got the talent, and we've got the speed to make sure that that happens, lest anybody should be questioning why I'm still wearing my Maple Leaf jacket, which I will continue to wear. The city, I think, has been going through this weather event quite well, and I think that's because of a lot of advanced planning, and it's because, quite frankly, this has turned out to be largely consistent with what was forecast. And just to go through the different areas, first of all, Hydro has experienced very little so far with respect to outages, but they have crews on standby to deal with whatever might come up. The TTC continues to run. Of course, it's a weekend, so they have a reduced level of service in any event, and they've had some things they've had to do to adjust to the weather conditions, such as on St. Clair, where the streetcars were replaced with buses, and they're having some issues, as are some cars, on some of the streets with the hills that we all know about, Dufferin Avenue Road and so on. But otherwise, again, they're doing quite well. With respect to the roads are obviously in a condition where people should be discouraged, and they are discouraged by me, please, from driving. Don't go out this weekend if you absolutely don't have to do so. The conditions are bad. A lot of people have raised questions about the plowing. The plowing has been done on the expressways in accordance with the city standards that are well established for weather events of this kind involving snow and freezing rain and sleet and so on. But there's been a very careful decision made with respect to how other streets are handled, which Barbara Gray can explain. But the bottom line is this. One of the things that I was most impressed by in being up in the emergency center is that they've looked at this entire event over, say, a 36-hour period. And I think, as you all know, the forecasts, which have been very accurate to date, have contemplated heavy rain coming later today. And if you plow all of that slush and all of that frozen ice pellets onto the side of the road, it dramatically increases the chances that we would have a real flooding problem if we get heavy rains later on. And so there has been a decision made to kind of follow a balancing act, in effect, of leaving some of that there where otherwise it might have been taken away, because to have plowed it over to the side, given the imminence of this heavy rain, might have made the flooding problem worse later on. And so that's a judgment call that is being made, but it's being made with the long view in mind, which is to make sure that we don't create huge problems with flooding when there's a very substantial rain downfall expected later this evening. Who did I leave out of all that? The police have really reported, and the fire, very little out of the ordinary to us. And so I think what you'd be impressed with if you went upstairs and had a visit, as I did, is the following. The first thing that's on the wall up there that was put on the wall before the bad weather arrived was a list of things that were learned from the last ice storm. And it ranges all the way from making sure you test generators through to making sure there's better communications in place. And I want to thank the media for the fact that they have communicated so thoroughly what the weather conditions were and help people to understand when they should be staying home, which is frankly most of the time between now and sometime tomorrow, when we hope that the heavy rain and the wind have passed us by. But there's a big chart up on the wall there that has all of those lessons, and they've been going through that and making sure they follow all the things that their own advice and the reports suggested they should. They have people up there representing every branch of the government, from the fire department through to transportation through to the TTC, who are coordinating all of their efforts to make sure that whatever may come our way in the next 24 hours, that we're ready to deal with it. And so from my standpoint, knowing that they have all those resources deployed, and they have been deployed for some time, and knowing that so far so good in terms of the city coming through this quite well, we just have to hope that the rest of the weather event is something that we can just get through, and then maybe spring will actually be here. It was interesting, they were telling me that on the weather maps yesterday, there were a couple of times when the really bad weather sort of was moving from Hamilton, and it seemed to almost separate and go around the city of Toronto, and we didn't get the worst of it. I mean, it was bad enough as it was, but we didn't get the worst of it in some respects. But that's the kind of detail in which they're looking at the weather charts and all the sophisticated weather predictions, and staying in touch with Environment Canada, and they will, of course, continue to do so. So I think that that sort of summarizes where things are, which is in a reasonable place. I know the weather is not good. It's a good Sunday to stay home, and I would hope people will take advantage of the opportunity to stay home, those that don't have to go out to work or for some kind of emergency. People should hopefully stay home. Please stay off the roads. Use public transit if you're going to go anywhere, but even the public transit system is under some stress and strain with these kinds of conditions. And so it's a good day to watch some sports or watch something on Netflix or talk to your family. And hopefully this will pass and we'll be into spring by sometime later in the week.
Mayor Tory, you explained the plowing operations, but are there fewer plows now than there would be in the winter? Because we've heard some contracts end April 1st. I don't know what it is with the city.
Well, Barbara Gray can explain the percentages, but the bottom line is there are still lots of plows that are available, and there are many other contracts that don't expire until April 15th, because if you look at the sort of general pattern of weather over the years, there's always a couple of these events that happen in April, and so the bottom line is that the city is still well equipped to deal with this, and there has been a decision made that there won't be as much plowing done, but perhaps I'll ask Barbara if she would comment on that.
Thank you, Mayor. So we have about 80 pieces of equipment, salters and plow-enabled devices out on the street. We've done some plowing on the DVP, and as the Mayor said, part of our interest is in making sure that the catch basins stay clear so that when we have flooding and additional rain that happens later in the day and over tonight into tomorrow, that those catch basins can do their job. We certainly do have both contracted and in-house staff. We have people on a rotation. We've been working sort of on a 24-hour basis since the beginning of the storm, and we'll continue to do so as necessary.
What about the percentages the Mayor was saying? Are there fewer plows? Will that be an issue?
So we definitely have fewer plows than we have at a full peak season in the winter time, but we, even when we have access to the number of equipment that we have during our peak winter season, we don't always deploy them. We always right-size the amount of vehicles that we deploy based on the event. And so we have, as I mentioned, both contracted and in-house services to address this event, and we're comfortable with the level that we have equipment out on the roads.
Initially, it was said that there were 65 or salting trucks on the road on Friday. Did that number change for Saturday? I heard the number was at 80.
It did. We are up to just about 80.
Is there a reason why it changed from Friday to Saturday, Sunday?
We monitor the conditions. We had access to additional salters, and we brought them out to continue with the salting operations.
What can you tell people in terms of which roads are being prioritized for salting?
So we are always looking at our service levels, which is about 2.5 centimeters of accumulation on the expressways, and then we'll start with plowing operations. That for plowing, that's certainly the highest priority. With regard to the arterial roads, that's where we head next. And then the collectors, we are doing some snow removal and salting around, with our manual crews around the bus stops and high pedestrian activities. We've also been salting the protected bike lanes and those areas where we have the highest volumes of people traveling.
Can you talk about the difficulty the mixed precipitation creates? Ice pellets, freezing rain.
It does create a lot of difficulty in terms of managing the event. Since we're here in Canada, obviously, we have a lot of experience dealing with winter weather conditions, and so this type of storm is not, and changing precipitation is not unusual in the course of a winter storm. We have very good and timely information from the Weather Service, and so we're able to track and manage, as the Mayor mentioned, the storm and how it's rolling out over the course of the event, and so we monitor our conditions. We have internal conference calls where we check in on conditions across the city. Our department district communication centers are stood up on a 24-hour basis so that we can monitor the storm and be able to adapt to those conditions, which I think is the most important thing, that we're able to react to it when we see a changing condition. And that's one of the reasons why keeping those catch basins open as we anticipate the rain and additional accumulation of rain, which might lead to flooding, is so critical.
What do you think drivers might come across tomorrow morning?
Tomorrow morning for the commute, I think it's a little bit too early to say. We'll continue to monitor and manage. We are going to be planning for some of the typical areas where we might see flooding to be out overnight tonight, and making sure those catch basins are clear and making sure that we're getting communication out for the morning commute to drivers so that they can be prepared.
Are sidewalks going to be plowed? They've been really tough to get down.
Yeah, so we've had some of our crews around bus stops in particular, where I've been out actually just last night. I was out on Dundas and I saw the sidewalk plows out and managing some of the high volume bus stops. So certainly there, we knew there were events that were happening down in the south part of downtown last night around the Rogers Center and the AAC, and so we had extra crews out salting and managing those sidewalks and the roads around there to make sure that when people left those events, they were able to get out in a reasonable fashion.
Are there any sort of
financial implications for having a storm that comes this late into the season?
We manage our budget related to our winter emergencies. We look at our budget over a number of years, and we kind of set it each year based on what we've experienced in previous years. We always have a little bit around in case we have these late season events, and so we are still within our budgets to manage these events.
Do you have a specific number of the number of plows right now compared to the winter storm?
There are 80 salt trucks. I believe 30 of them are enabled with plows. We typically have access to about 200 of them. As I mentioned, we don't typically deploy them all. It's based on the conditions. We have a number of winter contracts that are spread out throughout the city, and so it's not only, we don't just flip the switch for everywhere. We tailor the response to the local conditions as well.
So 30 plows.
We have 30 plow-enabled vehicles of the 80 salter trucks.
Are we using those plows or not using?
All of our equipment is out. All of our equipment is out.
But even though you said that we are strategically not plowing all the roads because we don't want to fill it.
So 30 enabled, I said. So the DVP plows were out. We did a little bit of plowing in Scarborough last night, especially on some of the hills in areas. But the bulk of our activity right now is salting.
Can I just say, Barbara and her crew and James and his crew, they have to take the long view on this. And this is something that I hope people will understand, people out across the city. Because I was very impressed at the fact that they have almost an hour-by-hour expectation of how the weather is going to change. But let's not forget that almost the most severe part of this in terms of unusual weather is going to be the magnitude of the rainfall that is expected to come later today. And that could cause serious flooding problems, and so they have to take account of that. And all the planning that I saw being done upstairs is with a view to saying, well, we just can't look at what's going on this hour or the next 2 hours, but rather we have to look at the next 12 to 24 hours. And no one would thank us if we, plowed every little millimeter of snow off or sleet off the streets and then ended up causing a catastrophic flooding problem, tomorrow morning. And so they've had to, as I said, follow a balancing act, and I think they've done that in a professional manner. And it's easy for all of us who are trying to get around today to, second guess that. But I think that I trust in their judgment that they're going to do the plowing that really needs to be done, and they're going to not do the plowing that might cause a flooding problem tomorrow, because the flooding is as serious as the difficult road conditions are today. In fact, much more serious potentially for the city.
Can you talk about the city's flooding preparedness plan?
James?
So with the flooding preparedness plan, we work with a number of different agencies. We work with Toronto Water, Toronto Region Conservation Authority to better monitor what the situation would be. Transportation Service is a vital player in that whole organization. So what it is right now, we have a team upstairs having that conversation around what our flood contingency plan would be with those stakeholders if we do see an increase in that volume of water across those transportation corridors. And we have those teams looking at it not just as the mayor has spoken about. In the next 4 hours, we're looking all the way out to like the Tuesday or Wednesday. What does it look like? So we have those teams looking at that with those key stakeholders.
So flooding after Sunday, right into the weekend, that could be a possibility also.
So I think as the mayor spoke about, we're not looking at it by the hour. There's teams that are looking at it by the hour. We are looking at out to Tuesday to Wednesday to Thursday, so that we're better prepared to understand how this thing might change, but how to deal with potentially if there is an incident and there is flooding, so that we're prepared to respond over a greater period of time.
Has there been any flooding so far?
Not that I'm aware of.
And can I just say in that regard again, I want the people to be reassured. When you're in the Emergency Management Centre, they have a display up there that largely comes from the Toronto Region Conservation Authority, showing all the hot spots where we often have flooding issues, and it's being constantly and continuously monitored, including the sort of usual places that we get accustomed to in the city, with some of the underpasses and places like the Don Valley Parkway. They literally have a gauge, because there's electronic monitoring of the Don Valley Parkway lower section that watches the water levels, and they're watching this all the time. But again, this is why they have to take the longer view on these things to make sure that every consideration is taken of making sure that is addressed, and not that we don't cause ourselves more problems with some of this flooding that we already know is a possibility with the level of rainfall that's expected.
Mayor Tory, what about what you've heard from Toronto Hydro, given that we've been getting more ice pellets than freezing rain? It's a very different situation than that big ice storm.
The hydro people have actually had a relatively uneventful time thus far, but they're on standby. They have people on high alert, as they call it in their lexicon, because if there's an accumulation of ice, which of course we may go through today depending on how the forecast turns out, that plus the high winds that are expected there today could cause problems with trees, impacting on hydro lines or just hydro lines coming down themselves. But thus far, there have been very few outages in the city, and the outages they've had, for example, a couple of them were